You finish your prayer, and something feels strange. Your body prayed. Your tongue recited the verses. Your forehead touched the ground, but your mind was somewhere else the entire time. You stood in front of Allah and somehow spent half the prayer replaying a conversation from earlier that day. You remembered an email you forgot to send. You thought about something embarrassing that happened 3 years ago. You even planned tomorrow's schedule while reciting Surah Al-Fatiha, and when the prayer ended, the noise slowly disappeared again. Almost like the moment of standing before Allah triggered something inside you. Most people think this means they are simply bad at concentrating. They blame their attention span. They blame social media. They blame their lack of spirituality. But the great Andalusian thinker Ibn Arabi saw something far more unsettling. He spent years studying the inner life of worshippers, and he noticed a strange pattern. The closer a person moved toward real presence with Allah, the louder the ego became. Your mind does not become noisy during prayer by accident. It becomes noisy because something inside you is being threatened. And this is where something most Muslims never think about enters the picture. Wudu, not just as physical purification, but as a quiet dismantling of the machine inside you that produces inner noise. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly why your mind becomes loud in prayer, and why wudu was designed to silence it. In this video, we are going to look at something almost nobody notices about wudu. First, we will look at why your mind becomes loudest exactly when you start praying. Then we will examine how the ego secretly survives inside religious rituals. Then Ibn Arabi will show us why every limb washed in wudu is actually washing a different layer of your inner world. After that, we will uncover the psychological mechanism that turns wudu into a reset button for your mind. And finally, we will look at 3 practical ways to perform wudu that actually quiet the inner noise before prayer begins. By the end of this video, you will never walk to the sink for wudu the same way again. Modern Muslims have a strange problem. We know more about Islam than any generation before us. We have lectures, books, podcasts, reminders, endless Islamic content. But internally, the mind feels louder than ever. Thoughts running constantly. Self-criticism, comparison, endless. Internal commentary. You scroll your phone and suddenly, you are comparing your life with people you have never met. You pray and suddenly, your brain starts replaying conversations that happened years ago. Psychologists today call this cognitive overload. Your brain receives more information than it can process, so it keeps generating internal commentary to maintain a sense of control. But 800 years before modern neuroscience studied this, Ibn Arabi was already writing about it. Born in 1165 in Muslim Spain, he became one of the most intellectually rigorous thinkers in Islamic history. His monumental work, Al-Futuhat al-Makkiyah, spans thousands of pages, examining consciousness, perception, the ego, and the spiritual psychology of worship. According to Ibn Arabi, the human self, the nafs, survives by keeping the mind busy. It creates commentary, interpretation, narration, stories about what is happening to you. Because silence is dangerous for the ego. In silence, its illusions become visible. Modern neuroscience discovered something similar. Researchers describe a brain system called the default mode network. It activates when your mind is wandering and thinking about yourself, your past, your future, your identity. But the fascinating part is this. This network becomes quieter during states of deep presence, moments when the mind is not narrating reality, but simply experiencing it. Ibn Arabi described this 8 centuries earlier. He called it Hudur, or presence before God, and he believed something profound. Rituals in Islam are not random acts of obedience. They are architectures of consciousness, structures designed to guide the human self from noise into presence. And Wudu is the very first doorway. Think of a 22-year-old university student. He just finished a long day of classes. On the way to the mosque, he keeps replaying something that happened earlier. A friend criticized him in front of others. It was small, a joke, but something about it stayed under his skin. Now he stands at the wudu sink, water running, hands washing. He rinses his mouth, but inside his head the conversation continues. He is defending himself, explaining what he should have said, imagining the perfect response he didn't give earlier. You know this feeling. The conversation ended hours ago, but inside your mind the argument is still happening. This is the inner courtroom, and according to Ibn Arabi, this courtroom is where the ego lives. In he writes that the tongue is not only the organ of speech, it is the instrument through which the nafs narrates reality. Even when your mouth is silent, the inner tongue keeps speaking, commenting, defending, explaining, rehearsing, protecting your image. Now think about the very first sensory act in wudu. After washing the hands, you rinse the mouth 3 times. Most people think this is simply about physical cleanliness. But Ibn Arabi saw something symbolic. The mouth represents the voice of the ego, and when water fills it, speech stops. For a moment, the inner narrator pauses. Imagine your mind like a radio that never turns off. Songs of memory, talk, shows of self-criticism, arguments from years ago, random thoughts, jumping between stations. Wudu is the moment when the volume starts. Turning down, modern psychology calls this rumination. Studies show that when the brain repeatedly revisits the same thought loops, it strengthens emotional attachment to them. The more you replay the moment, the more real it feels. But here is the fascinating connection. Researchers have found that interrupting sensory patterns, even with something simple like cold water on the face or mouth, can disrupt these mental loops. Science describes what is happening, but Ibn Arabi tells you what to do about it. He believed rinsing the mouth before prayer was a physical reminder. Leave your arguments outside. Leave your defenses outside. Leave your imaginary speeches outside. Because prayer is not a courtroom. You are not here to defend yourself. You are here to be seen. But here's what most people miss. If your inner voice is still arguing while you pray, then the ego is still speaking in front of God. And that is why prayer sometimes feels empty. Because the one speaking inside you is not the heart. It is the self trying to win a debate that ended hours ago. Prayer cannot begin until the inner courtroom is empty. Imagine a man in his early 30s. He is known in his community as religious. He prays regularly. He volunteers at the mosque. People respect him. He stands at the wudu sink before Maghrib. He washes his hands, rinses his mouth, then he splashes water onto his face. But as he lifts his head, he glances at the mirror. He adjusts his beard, straightens his hair, fixes his expression, not because he is vain, but because he is used to being seen. And even in worship, that awareness follows him. This is exactly what Ibn Arabi warned about. In Fushus al-Hikam, he writes that human beings constantly construct a face for the world, a role, a reputation, a spiritual identity, and the nafs protects this identity fiercely. The ego does not disappear when someone becomes religious. It simply changes its costume. The same self that once wanted status in the world now wants spiritual status. Respect, recognition, to be known as someone close to Allah. Have you ever noticed this? You pray in congregation, and suddenly your recitation becomes slower. Your posture becomes straighter, your voice slightly softer. Even your humility becomes visible. This is not hypocrisy in the simple sense. It is something subtler. The ego wants to be admired for being humble. That is why washing the face in wudu matters so much. The face is the center of identity, the part of you people recognize, the surface where reputation lives. When water runs over it, something symbolic happens. Imagine identity like layers of makeup on the soul. Your achievements, your image, your spiritual reputation, your idea of who you are supposed to be. When the water touches your face in wudu, it quietly says, none of that enters prayer. This is where it becomes uncomfortable, because many people do not actually come to prayer to meet Allah. They come to confirm something about themselves, that they are disciplined, that they are good Muslims, that they are progressing spiritually. But Ibn Arabi says real presence requires something terrifying, the collapse of the self-image, because Allah does not meet your performance. He meets the reality underneath it, the self without costume, without reputation, without defense. And that moment is frightening for the ego, because the ego survives by being seen by others. But prayer is the one place where only Allah sees you. God does not meet your reputation. He meets what is underneath it. Picture a young man waiting for Isha prayer. He sits in the mosque courtyard scrolling his phone. One video becomes 3.3, becomes 20, .news, .arguments, .comedy, .music, .opinions, .within. 15 minutes he has heard hundreds of voices, people he has never met, suddenly living inside his mind. Then the adhan finishes. He stands for wudu, but something interesting happens. The phone goes into his pocket, yet the voices stay in his head. He starts prayer, and suddenly random phrases from videos pop into his mind. Music fragments, memes, arguments. You have felt this. The mind becomes an echo chamber of everything you consumed that day in Al-Futuhat al-Makkiyah. Ibn Arabi writes something remarkable. He says, the senses are doors of the heart. Every sound and image enters through them and leaves an imprint. Perception is not neutral. It plants seeds inside the inner world. Modern neuroscience calls this attentional residue. Searchers discovered that when you rapidly shift attention between stimuli, especially digital content, fragments of each stimulus remain active in the brain. Even after you move on, science describes what happens, but Ibn Arabi tells you what it means spiritually. Your heart becomes crowded, like a room with all the windows, open voices blowing in from every direction, and then you try to pray inside that room. No wonder the mind feels noisy. Now notice something about wudu that many people rush through. After washing the face, you wipe the ears. A small act, 2 fingers, 1 motion. But symbolically, it is profound. You are acknowledging that the ears carried the world inside you. And before standing before Allah, the windows must close. Imagine a quiet house after a storm. The doors finally shut. The wind outside still blows, but inside, there is stillness. Your prayer sounds like whatever you listened to all day. Imagine a shopkeeper closing his store just before Maghrib. All day his hands moved constantly, counting money, passing receipts, unlocking cabinets, answering phone calls, shaking hands, pointing at prices, arguing with a difficult customer. Now he locks the door and walks to the mosque. Outwardly, he has left work behind, but his hands still carry the energy of the marketplace. He stands at the wudu sink. The very first thing he does is wash them 3 times, slowly, water running across the fingers that held the world all day in Al-Futuhat, Al-Makkiyah, Al-Futuhat, Al-Makkiyah. Ibn Arabi writes that actions leave subtle impressions on the limbs. The body remembers what it does repeatedly. Habits become patterns. Patterns become identities. Your hands are the tools through which you interact with the world. They build, they grasp, they hold, they take, they defend, they protect. So when wudu begins with the hands, something symbolic happens. You are releasing the day. Imagine your hands like keys that touch dozens of doors since Ya and since eyes, morning, work, money, conflict, responsibilities. Every door left a trace. When water flows across your hands in wudu, those doors close, because prayer requires empty hands. You cannot hold the world and hold presence at the same time. Have you noticed something? When people feel anxious, their hands move constantly. They tap, scroll, fidget, reach. For their phone, movement becomes an escape from stillness. Modern psychology calls this habitual motor discharge. The body releases internal tension through repetitive action, but wudu interrupts that. Pattern. The hands pours water, slows them down. Attention returns to sensation. The body begins to settle. Science describes the pattern, but Ibn Arabi points toward the meaning. Your limbs must release the world before the heart can meet Allah, and the washing of the hands is the first surrender. You cannot stand before God while still holding the world. Here is the insight that changes everything. Most people believe wudu prepares you for prayer by making you clean. But Ibn Arabi points towards something deeper. Wudu prepares you by making you empty. Think about how most people approach spirituality. They try to add things: more focus, more devotion, more effort, more spiritual feeling. But Ibn Arabi repeatedly writes in Al-Futuhat or Makkiyah that the heart must become vacant before divine presence appears. A crowded heart cannot receive revelation. Noise cannot host stillness. The ego fills every space with commentary, stories about what is happening, judgments about what you are experiencing, narratives about who you are becoming. But Allah enters the heart when narration stops. So wudu is not just preparation for prayer, it is preparation for silence. Each limb washed removes something unnecessary. the arguments of the tongue, the mask of the face, the noise of the ears, the grasping of the hands. Layer by layer, the self becomes quieter. And then something remarkable happens. Prayer begins, not as performance, not as effort, but as presence. The ego thinks it must produce spirituality, but Ibn Arabi says spirituality appears when the ego stops producing. The quieter the self becomes, the louder reality speaks. Let's turn everything we discussed into 3 simple practices, not complicated techniques, just small shifts in awareness. Practice 1. The 10-second pause. After washing each limb, pause for 10 seconds before moving to the next. Feel the water on the skin. Notice the breath. Let the mind settle. Modern psychology calls this pattern interruption. When you slow down a repetitive routine, the brain exits autopilot and becomes conscious again. This breaks rumination loops, the same loops we talked about earlier. The inner courtroom starts losing its momentum. Practice 2. The identity drop. When you wash your face, pause for a moment and say internally, none of my roles enter this prayer. Not your job, not your reputation, not even your idea of being a good Muslim. Just you and Allah. Psychologists call this self-distancing, when people mentally step outside their identity roles. Emotional defensiveness decreases and presence increases. 800 years earlier, Ibn Arabi described this moment as the heart standing before Allah without costume. Practice 3. The sensory reset after wiping your ears. Take 1 slow breath before continuing. Just 1. Notice the quiet around you, the sound of water, the echo of the room. Your mind begins to settle. Neuroscientists call this an attention reset. A brief pause that calms the default mode network, the brain system responsible for self-narration. Science describes what happens, but Ibn Arabi shows you the destination. Presence. These 3 small practices transform wudu from a rushed ritual into a doorway. And once you experience that doorway, you will never hurry through it again. Think back to the moment we started with, standing in prayer. While your mind wandered everywhere else, you thought that noise meant failure, a lack of focus, maybe even weak faith. But now you see it differently. That noise was never random. It was the ego realizing something dangerous was about to happen. Silence, presence, the moment where your inner commentary disappears and only reality remains. And wudu was always guiding you toward that moment. Not with lectures, not with philosophy, but with water. Hands releasing the world, mouth leaving arguments behind, face dropping its mask, ears closing the windows of noise. Layer by layer, the self becomes quiet until prayer begins, and suddenly the space inside you is wide enough to meet Allah. Wudu is not washing the body, it is lowering the volume of the self. Now, I want you to think about something honestly. The next time you stand for prayer, ask yourself this question. When your mind becomes loud in prayer, what part of the world did you carry into that prayer that wudu had not yet washed away?